very excited to welcome back Peter Grandich to the show. He's been studying markets for a long time. He knows how to call out bubbles when they exist, like the one in 2021. In crypto, you were relatively early to the uranium trade before the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust came in and started buying it off the market. And so now we're in a brand new macroeconomic slump. Would love to get your take just first overall on what is happening in these markets. We know the Federal Reserve is so influential nowadays.
So, approaching my 40th complete year around Wall Street, I'll say that those of us who look into a crystal ball, we just really become experts on how to eat a lot of broken glass. So, I'll give you an educated guess, but that's the best it really is. And that's really the best anybody can do, no matter what they might seem like otherwise. I think if we breathe for a second and understand that there are some dramatic events unfolding that either people don't have time to focus on because of their struggles to stay afloat, or they choose not to, which more I think comes from the Wall Street group. We cannot continue incurring debt in the manner that we do. It's just an economic impossibility that one day, I don't know what day it may be. It may be a lot longer than any of us think, or it could be a lot faster than anybody think. But the way that we are approaching debt and the ability to service it is becoming not just challenging, but approaching the point of no return. You know, the Congressional Budget Office, which is about the closest thing to a bipartisan government agency, now says that in less than 9 years, they see our hard debt being at $50 trillion. And I have to tell you this, I never imagined at any point from the day I entered Wall Street to maybe a few years ago that we would talk about things with the letter T when it comes to debt. It was an impossibility. It just didn't fathom it as that could even be. You know, we were the world's largest credited nation when I started. So now we have budget deficits that are in a trillion or more dollars a year. And that debt, by the way, is not just on the government level, state and local, but it's also in corporate. It's also in consumer on all phases. And whether or not you choose, now I choose to use the Bible as an important part of my everyday life, but even if you just use it as a historical reference book, there's not one positive word about it. And it has a lot of warnings about it. And I think we're getting to the point where we're going to have difficulty as a country servicing the interest rates. Forget paying it back. Don't ask me to come up with any way that this country could ever produce enough excess income where it can pay all its daily needs and produce enough to pay back all this debt. But we're getting to the point where the interest rate is going to be a challenge. And I think I think that is really a concern that I don't expect politicians to talk about it, but I think anybody that understands it as you and I do need to share that with the public at large. That's the first one. The second one, and then I'm glad to hear what you have to say, is a budding crisis, not quite as bad as the debt, but bad enough. And that's the retirement crisis. See, retirement is a man-made product. It really didn't exist until the 1880s when a German politician decided in order to get elected, he would offer people who were most likely not to live to the age that he said it would start at, government assistance. And that's really where retirement was born from. People worked till they couldn't work until the last 100 or so years. And now we live in a society where many of us are killing ourselves for 75 or 80% of our lives, hoping to live the last 20% in a certain comfort level. The problem with that is with 2/3 of the country now working paycheck to paycheck, a lot of people are never going to reach that cycle. And they're going to seek government assistance along the way, whether it's affordable housing, which is a challenge, medicine, because it's great that we're living longer. Trust me, I'm 67. It takes a bit more for me to get through a day now than it did when I was 37. And medicine is likely to be one of the things that's going to help propel what's ever left of my natural life. So just there, if we would just stop, breathe, and just have a good talk as a country, we got two huge issues. And we didn't even get to the biggest one, and we will, I'm certain, in our discussion, and that is the coming changeover to BRIC nations becoming a dominant economic force in the world in my opinion, will rival what the Industrial Revolution did to world trade. So there's a lot to talk about. A lot of it isn't positive, unfortunately. And just so you know, I don't sell anything that because people are scared they run and buy. Okay, so I chase far more people away from my planning group than I bring in by speaking like this. But it's what I see.
Yeah, these are serious issues, and it seems like every single one is extremely negative for the dollar, right? Every single one, because in theory, they would have to print money to afford this government stimulus that they want to give to people, right? In terms of retirement crisis, they would have to print money to maybe inflate away the debt, so to speak. And they would have to print money to kind of buy their own debt because no one around the world is going to want to buy the bonds if the whole BRICS nation kind of does de-dollarize. And so in a sticky inflationary environment where rates are high, where, like you said, rates are causing our government debt payments to be unsustainably high, I guess, what is your take on kind of the economic situation with inflation? Because if they can keep that low, then maybe some of this can be pushed out. But what is your thought on inflation, the Fed?
So I've never trusted government statistics. And I think more than them are massaged. And it doesn't matter what aisle you're on, it comes from both sides of the political, who's ever in power. It's not one over the other. And one of the things I believe that has been miscalculated for years, long before it became front page again, is the real rate of inflation. Okay. So to think that what we just spoke about, the enormous amount of debt, people struggling day to day, and the Fed can somehow get inflation back to 2%, I think is a real stretch. I mean, the only way I could see that happening if we had a calamity collapse in the world and basically people are out of work, and who wants to get inflation down to 2% that way? And the problem that no one talks about is I shouldn't say no one, the mainstream media doesn't talk about, is that with all this money creation, you're just igniting potential for more inflation. It's more and more dollars chasing fewer and fewer items. That's the hallmark of inflation. And what's really sad is no matter what the rate has been, wage increase has not been able to keep up. So the vast majority of Americans are losing purchasing power year after year. And maybe they're not losing it in one big swoop, so they don't feel it all at once, but it's becoming more and more difficult. I can't tell you, I live in a 55 and over community, and I've heard this enough times in the last few months. Boy, I went shopping today. I used to fill up a basket. Now it's half a basket. It's twice the price. And they're basically right. And inflation is an ugly uh, thing to have to try to catch and make up for. And I don't see how it gets back to a level that people can live within. That doesn't mean that that elite, that 10 to 15% that continues to do well in this type of economy at the expense of a vast amount of people below it. Listen, one of the things that's very important right now, the lowest 40% of earners in the United States now have less cash on hand than they did before the pandemic started. That's a very important working part of our economy, and they have less cash now than before the pandemic. And the debt is so much more that exists. So I'll just tell you that I know Wall Street's going to continue to rally on the belief that inflation, oh, wow, that number wasn't as bad as last month, and so forth and so on. But the bottom line is 8 out of 10 Americans are not going to get favorable conditions in the manner of how inflation is still going to be relative to all other things that are important in our economic life.
Yeah, it is just such a huge problem that unfortunately people don't understand. So people are making less money, but working harder for it because now you have to compete with AI and different technological revolutions. So they're working harder for it, but they can spend less. It just causes so much destruction, right? Because people are going to get fed up. And that's where populism comes in and different political ideologies. And it just becomes a big mess usually when an empire starts to wobble.
You know, you hit such an important point. That's why there's a certain group now who we would never pay 10 seconds attention to, but gets a certain amount of people because things are so bad that they can basically point fingers and say, well, it's bad for you because of those folks or what they're doing over there. And that is the far left. I don't have to name names, but people like AOC, who really make no reasonable assessments. There's nothing worthy in their conversations, yet to a certain amount of group who's more and more are in that wagon and struggling and hoping people are going to pull them, it sounds good. And that's why they're able to get a listening audience that might have not existed in better times. So in a country that's clearly moved more towards secularism, a good heavy dose of socialism, and a little salting of communism, those are the type of people that all get a voice that might have not had a voice a couple of decades ago.
That's right. It's emotion based because there's a lot of fear. And so I guess, the most important question would be what could a individual investor who is, living on a paycheck, who doesn't have that much disposable income, how can your average person kind of have a hedge against inflation?
So in this planning group, no matter what they were worth, I even told the athletes that I used to deal with that were making tens of millions of dollars a year to do the same thing. And that is for 30 days, just write down everything you spent money for. Bought a piece of gum, write it down. People first find that they're spending money in areas that not necessarily. Two, if they do have means and they have assets, they own different things. They own real estate. They own a business. We deal with a lot of small businesses. They own investments. Many times they have professionals assisting them that specialize in those areas, but they've never kind of all been in the same room together. And when we sit down, we see while one appears to be doing great, it's actually taken away from over here. So there's a thing called efficiency. There's people that make a living being efficiency experts. So most families aren't 100% efficient. They're just not. Even if they don't have a lot of money, there's just certain ways. And the slogan I like to use to get them into that, which they don't want to hear, by the way, is less is more. To to understand, there's a great skit that the late George Carlin did about stuff, and he just had too much stuff. And the way I know we have too much stuff, you just have to drive down a major highway anywhere in the U.S. and you'll see it. It's called public storage. Our parents and grandparents did not have the need for public storage. They lived in smaller dwellings on average. They had a lot less stuff, but they weren't any more messed up. If not, most likely they were less messed up than we are. So the American thought of more things equal more happiness, or how Wall Street likes to sell it, if you watch the commercials, more money equals more happiness, is really leading people down a road to that's not going to fulfill a lot of people. A handful will, but not a lot. And so I think you really have to, in a sense, look at how you're living, ask yourself, do I need a car just to get me from point A to B? Or do I need a car that gets me from A to B and I can go, hey, everybody, look what kind of car I'm driving? That's all a personal decision, okay? But most cars, whether they sell for 25,000 or 125,000, will get you from A to B. It's a question of what else extra you think is worth it to have and so forth and so on. But I think things are tough enough for the average working people now is that you have to look at every level of life from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep.
That's a great point because it seems like the credit card debt has gone up. So people have just started to like borrow to keep the lifestyle they're used to in mass. Like the whole country, it seems like, is doing that.
You hit a great point. The reason we don't have a lot of people saving for retirement because the money that should have been put towards that has been used instead to sustain a lifestyle. I say this all the time. I say 7 out of 10 families are living at least one lifestyle above where their finances truly. So people say, "Oh, how can they do it?" They borrow or they take away from things that they would need down in the future. For instance, I sat with a family with 4 children, and all 4 children, this is going to sound silly, but it's really at the heart of what we're talking about, had bad teeth. I mean, they were just bad. And the parents weren't taking the kids. They should have had braces and all, but they used that to go on vacation somewhere. And they justified themselves, say, look, I got to take my kids to Disneyland. Yeah, I didn't fix their teeth. But trust me, when they get older, they're going to have real issues. It's going to cost them a lot more money because of what they did. And that's just one simple example of how people borrow against the future, so to speak. And that's what most people have done. And a day of reckoning for that is here.
Seems like a lot of it is based on kind of like the wealth effect of rising assets and how, the Federal Reserve can, with one word, just like pump the stock market up. Maybe people feel richer. I don't know if the stock market is truly outrunning inflation at this point, which is a problem. So I guess, do you foresee kind of like everyone's 401k, the S&P 500 to keep rising, or is there a reckoning there too in the broader stock market?
Well, in recent weeks, in the last several weeks, I don't want to participate in it because I feel I'm at the level where I should be in my exposure. But I have encouraged a market rally for those who found themselves a year ago going, my golly, I have too many equities. And, I'm really at risk that I really shouldn't be. Use this rebound that we've had and could continue for at least a few more months to get to a point where you have peace of mind. I don't think any in portfolio is worth having if you have to spend more than a couple minutes each day thinking about it or looking at it. In fact, you shouldn't even have to look at it on a daily basis like that. And a year ago, most people were. I mean, give me an example. If you look at a year ago, the average retirement portfolio was down 27% and inflation was double digit. So someone who was retired really had lost a third of their purchasing power. One third, a third of that third was gone because the inflation ate it away. Now the market rebounded a lot, so they got back that money, but they didn't really get it back because a year went by and things went up that much more. So even though they're back to the same dollar their portfolio was worth 2 years ago, it now buys 10 to 15% less than it used to because that's what inflation's been over the last 2 years, somewhere between 10 and 15% total. And people just don't grasp that. And so if they keep going like a yo-yo like that, and even though, wow, okay, my portfolio is kind of holding its own, it's really not because your purchasing power is disappearing. And that's why I think uh, we're going to have a huge problem. And the simplest way I like to explain it is about 10% of Americans belong in a wagon with us helping pull them. They have a variety of diseases, they've had issues, they've had unfortunate circumstances, and they need assistance. They should be pulled. Well, that wagon is far more than 10% now. There's a lot of more people in the wagon. And those of us who are left pulling, we're almost demeaned by our government. We're pointed that it's your fault and we're going to have reparations and this and that. And we're being taxed and paying through the nose and blamed for everything that have existed for the last 150 years, even though we've been alive only 30, 40, or 60 of those years. And they still want us to pull even harder. And people I know are saying, how can I get in that wagon? Or how can I avoid having to be one of the pullers? And so it's just not setting up. And then with all of that happening, there's a big change afoot in the world. I've said to you when we started, I truly believe what is transpiring with BRIC nations and the de-dollarization will lead to world trade being changed in the same manner that the Industrial Revolution changed it. And unfortunately, America is not going to be one of the major benefactors of that. It's probably going to be one of the countries that pays a price because of that. And that's only first now entering the main stage, and some people discussing it. But I don't think most professionals or most Americans in general have an understanding yet of what that's all going to mean.
Yeah, no, it is probably the biggest story in economics. So, yes, you have this slowing economy where they're going to have to stimulate more, but it's hard because there's inflation and it's just going to devalue the dollar and debase it even more. And then you have countries moving away from the US dollar as a reserve currency. So, could you explain kind of what's going on there and how you see that playing out?
Well, no one knows for certain which way it's going to go. I mean, in recent days, some of those country spokesmen are talking about a gold-backed currency or things of that nature. But I do think what's important that it's clear to understand is that America isn't the dominating force or the first person, or hey, it's like the Godfather spoke. Whatever they say, we kind of go with. Those days are gone. And this current president really accelerated that movement away. And where he did it the most damage, in my estimate, was in the Middle East. The Middle East always played both sides of the coin. They've never been allegiant to anyone else, but they were much more willing to work with America until our president went over in our most recent energy crisis and basically tried to bully them into making changes. And that opened their arms to our biggest competitor, China, who's now playing a role, and a significant role in the Middle East, but also opened the Saudis to actually talk to mortal enemies like Iran and start a diplomatic relation again. And those things don't help America. And it was just a couple of years ago under the previous administration that we were energy independent. And now our strategic reserve is at almost record lows. So there are a whole host of things that are going to take place. We're going to see countries now that say, hey, wait a minute. Yeah, why do we have to use the dollar? Listen, you're selling me this, I'm selling you that. Uh, why do we got to use this dollar and then be under the mercy that they can come around and do what they did to Russia to do to us? Let's come up with an alternative, either a basket of something or gold. And with digital gold, that's going to be a new word you're going to hear a lot about. You've heard a lot about cryptocurrencies. And now the new thing you're going to start hearing about is gold uh, blockchain technology, because it really does make world trade kind of be like the old days when two people would trade, and if you owe more than another, you would ship the gold, and that's how we used to be under a gold standard. Now with a digital gold, that can solve it. I think there's going to be the surprise is going to be is how much gold and digitalize is going to play a role in the new trading world outside of the United States. It's one of the reasons why I think the Western countries are trying to get everybody into this central bank currencies, because they really want to control everything. They want to see where, which they will be able to. If we're down to a digital currency, that's the only thing we have, our cash in our pocket. Trust me, they might not say they're looking at it, but they'll be looking at it or have ways to look at it. So the United States, in my estimate, ends up on the short end of the stick of this. This doesn't benefit the United States, these countries doing what they're doing. And it's going to be more even challenging at a time when we continue to just be indebted up to our eyeballs.
Yeah, you're right. The Middle East moving towards the east was just that's like the huge problem, because now you have India, China, Russia, the Middle East, South America, and it's just like I think I think there's more economic activity in those countries in the BRICS than in the G7 now or something. It's crazy.
The United States and was once our great allies to the north. Canada and the U.S. were the two world's largest trading partners. But they had their own issues with their leader, who's gone down a similar road that Biden has gone down to. And so I think we're much more weakened as a trading country or a trading bloc, the West, than at any time in history, at a time when those other countries are on the up and coming. And let's face facts. The geopolitics, the United States in no way, shape, or form can take a globe and point to as many countries that you would say, hey, they're very favorable towards us, would have been said 30 years ago, won't be said now.
So, do you see it playing out as kind of being this reorganization around this Eastern bloc of countries where there's just more economic growth, and then kind of the West kind of stagnates a little bit? And how does it not benefit America for this to happen?
Well, I think we've already see on a smaller scale regional trading blocks setting up. There are already groups that have been doing that in the Far East and what have you. But what's broadening in this is it going to lead to the eventual replacement of the dollar? That's going to be the key, because if it does, and no one knows for certain yet, I'm not saying I believe it's going to be, that's still up in the air. But understand this, even more lessening use of the dollars. Those dollars are still out there. They're going to come back here. People aren't using them. Well, what does that cause? More dollars, more inflation. And so it's very hard to see how the U.S. net benefits from all of this. It just is, and that's why I think if you look at some of the key Western countries, Canada, Japan, who has an enormous problem. It's not too far along from now where they're going to have one person working for every person retired. I mean, you want to talk about an insane system, economic system that'll be based on. There's not a lot of old-fashioned Western world countries that you can point to and go, wow, they are doing a bang-up job. They're just not. We're as a group much more weakened than 10, 20, 30 years ago at a time when the other groups that we used to call third world or forget it, they'll never get their act together, have. And that's all going to impact us here, whether we like it or not.
Wow. So at the end of the day, it's currency debasement, just more of it. Is that what's
Well,
going
that's one of the things, but I think the other thing is so much of how we view things is psychological. Like you say, you can get two people have a half a cup of water, and one says, "Oh my God, it's half empty," and the other person, "No, it's half full." That will also be the perception, and I think what's happening here in the U.S. because of what we've gone through and what's happening politically. Let's understand this: not only is the middle class being destroyed in America, but the middle ground is being destroyed in America. You're either way over here or you're way over here. And I don't see how, when it appears to me that Democrats, Republicans can't even get in the same room these days, let alone how are they going to be able to get together and deal with some of these big, big issues that need to be addressed. The debt issue, the restructuring of things like Medicare and Social Security, which are an absolute must have to happen and all. Uh, Infrastructure, the crumbling of our infrastructure. We're all going into this electrification era. Great. Ask anybody that knows anything about our power grid in the United States, and they'll tell you part of it was built by Thomas Edison. That's how old it is and how out of phase it is. There's a whole lot of things that have to be done at a critical time when people in America don't even want to talk to each other. So these are all things that just don't bode well. Now, does that mean you don't own any stocks because everything's collapsing tomorrow? No. But what I don't think you're going to be able to get away with is it's not going to be all boats rise. You're going to have to be extremely selective. You brought up a good point, which no one knows the answer to yet, is how much is artificial intelligence going to impact employment and type of jobs we're going to have. But it's a very big challenge going forward to find the handful of positivities that we could say that we have going for ourselves. And we already see it because the current generation is already having to move back with parents and struggling and not making the income, can't afford housing. These are all the things that used to always propel forward, and now they're actually going backwards.
The most important question is, well, what can I do about it? Like what can your average person do? You said cut back on spending. That's good. But do you have any
Well,
other?
look at it doesn't mean you have to cut back. First of all, trust me when I tell you, 9 out of 10 people that watch this who might have even considered coming to my planning group will not come to the planning group now because there will be somebody they'll hear a much better outlook somewhere else, and that would be more comforting to go with. I get so many people tell me, Peter, I know you're right, but I'm praying you're wrong. I mean, those are all the things you hear when you present,
Yeah.
not a very, very good outlook. Now, if I sold something that supposedly you'll benefit from, that'd be great, but I don't. But what I think people need to do is they need to come to some peace to begin with. It doesn't mean we can't live out our lives. Maybe we just can't live it in the things that the world tells us that we need to have that life. You know, a lot of people forget that there used to be 3 generations in a typical dwelling in a home. There was a great uncle or grandma or grandpa living with us. Now we send those people off if we can afford it to some assisted living or nursing home and all. Well, we're starting to see now in the boomer generation people who can't afford to live alone, they're living like in communions where people are sharing households just like they did when they were 20 or 25. We're going to have to go back in some sense to the ways our parents and grandparents lived just to sustain ourselves in this environment that's been built around with us. But I think that the toughest thing that's going to be for people is we're not, it's hard to find the leaders on any side of the aisle that can go through these tough times, the FDRs or even the Kennedys that were at certain points of in our lives, Reagan, uh, they seem to be less and less available. And to expect politics to solve our issues now is something that I personally don't count on at all. I don't see any way of that happening anytime soon.
Wow. So that is a great overview of what is going on in the United States, around the world. You're right. It is a very turbulent time. So do you have any other advice you want to give or anything else you want to share to people as we ride this out? And obviously, we'll look forward to getting another update from you at some point in the future, too.
So people say, well, Pete, if you feel that way, how are you getting through your days?
Yeah.
And I have challenges in those too. But I would guess that if your whole belief is this is it, this life on earth, and that's it, it can be really depressing. But for me, at least, and still billions of people in different types of faith have a belief that this is just a stepping stone to something else. And how we do here will affect what happens in those places. At a time when, at least in the United States and many parts of the Western world, where faith-based thinking is leaving and secular slash socialist communist thinking is seemingly returning, I still think that faith is the best investment anybody can make. And for me, at least, will get me and my family and the people that I care about through whatever may or may not be occurring on what we just discussed. And so somebody or something made those atoms explode. Okay, so when everybody talks about something, and if you look at what the earth looked like before man took over it, whatever created a pretty good place. So I have hope that whatever is responsible now, of course, I have a certain belief, but I'm trying to make this more general, that if we give that respect to Earth and all of that, that somehow we'll get through this.
Yeah, absolutely. Very true. So where can people go to find you, learn more from you, stay on top of these updates?
Well, most of them will probably not want to find me after our discussion, but if they still do, it's petergrandich.com is the website. I'm on Twitter. I enjoy it. I talk a lot about the markets and economies there. It's a fascinating place for me now because it's instantaneous. What I used to do to put out a newsletter was type the newsletter, get it typeset, go to the printer, wait till it fold it up, send it out in the mail. 3 days later, now you type something and the world hears you. It's a In that respect, Twitter has proved to be a very good place, and I do more on Twitter now than anything else.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Are you sure?
Yeah, no. This is really important stuff. And it's like you can kind of not notice it happening because it happens slow. But you're right. The pinch, like the less purchasing power. Like, why do I feel poor when I'm making, 20% more than I made 2 years ago? It's a problem, a huge, huge, huge problem, especially the people that are retired. So very important for people to understand this.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. God bless you.